As Alex reflected on the last few months, he realized with a pang how much his relationship with Stephanie had changed. She'd begun staying late at work more often than usual, and her explanations felt increasingly vague. The familiar spark that had once drawn them together seemed to flicker and fade. Her smile, once so effortlessly genuine, now looked like something she put on, carefully crafted yet distant. Noticing her wardrobe shift, Alex felt a twist of unease in his gut. Stephanie had always preferred a comfortable, practical style. Simple dresses, loose sweaters, and the occasional splash of jewelry. But now, she wore sleek suits, polished makeup, and stilettos that clicked with confidence as she walked out the door each morning. At first, Alex thought it was a professional shift, a newfound dedication to her career. However, it soon became clear her transformation wasn't solely for work. He caught her in front of the mirror, a faint smile tugging at her lips, adjusting her hair in a way that he hadn't seen in years. Conversations between them turned curt and clipped, barely scratching the surface of their lives together. Any question about her day received brief, nonchalant replies. "Work's been busy," she'd say, then change the topic or get up to check something in the kitchen, leaving an awkward silence hanging in the air. Gone were the evenings of cozy dinners and shared laughter. More often than not, Stephanie sat across from him, phone in hand, her face lit by the cold glow of the screen rather than the warmth of their bond. One night, as Alex lay in bed scrolling through memories of happier times, he noticed Stephanie had left her phone on the dresser. She had fallen asleep beside him, breathing steady and deep. Against his better judgment, a wave of curiosity washed over him. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. Just as he was about to unlock it, she stirred, and he quickly placed it back, his heart racing. The next morning, Stephanie seemed more irritable than usual. She skipped breakfast, grabbing her purse and jacket in a hurry. "Have a meeting downtown," she muttered, avoiding his gaze as she walked out the door without a goodbye. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling further away, slipping through his fingers like sand. Then there was the night she came home late again, her excuse feeling weaker than before. "Got stuck helping a coworker with a project," she said with a shrug, not even looking at him. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, her perfume noticeably stronger. Alex wanted to believe her but found himself sinking into doubt. One weekend, hoping to reconnect, he suggested they spend a day together, maybe a hike or a visit to the local art museum, something they both used to enjoy. But Stephanie declined, claiming she had plans to catch up with an old friend. "You don't know her," she added quickly, the words sharp and final. She left early that morning, her outfit a little too polished for a casual day out. Alex felt a pang of frustration and confusion. Who was this woman he'd been living with? It was a week later when he stumbled upon a strange receipt from a high-end restaurant he'd never heard of, tucked into her purse on the kitchen counter. Dinner for two, at a place she never mentioned visiting. His mind raced with questions, but when he confronted her, Stephanie shrugged it off, explaining it as a business dinner. Her eyes flashed with a hint of annoyance. "Do you really need to know every detail of my day?" she snapped. The coldness in her voice left him speechless. As the weeks passed, Alex found himself in a state of quiet turmoil, wrestling with his suspicions. Stephanie continued her late nights and her evasive answers. One evening, he decided to wait up for her, determined to at least have a proper conversation. She arrived home well past midnight, her expression guarded and tight-lipped. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, setting her bag down with forced casualness. "You were out late," he replied, keeping his tone as neutral as he could. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if calculating how much to reveal. "I told you, I was at a work function," she replied, brushing past him as if that was the end of the conversation. Alex felt the weight of the unspoken words between them. The following day, he asked one of her colleagues he knew vaguely if there had been a company gathering, but the colleague's blank expression told him everything he needed to know. The next few days were a blur of half-hearted small talk and missed connections. Stephanie spent more time in the guest room, catching up on work, and often left before dawn. Alex's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of her behavior. He noticed she'd been picking up more phone calls privately, stepping into another room and lowering her voice, her laughter strangely unfamiliar, almost flirtatious. One morning, Alex saw her phone buzz with a text from an unfamiliar number, a simple, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." His heart sank as he fought the urge to read further. Confronting her felt like a monumental task, yet the trust between them had cracked. He could see it in her eyes, the way she looked past him, her attention on something, or someone else. As days turned into weeks, Alex felt trapped in his own home, surrounded by memories of a life they had once shared. The evenings he spent alone grew longer, each one marked by the echo of her absence. The signs of her withdrawal became painfully clear. The new clothes, the perfume, the secrecy. Alex had reached his breaking point. Every whisper of doubt, every suspicious glance Stephanie threw over her shoulder, every late night and clipped conversation. All of it had led him to one unavoidable truth. There was something, or rather, someone lurking in the spaces between them. His nights grew restless, his mind tangled in webs of imagined betrayals, flickers of smiles he couldn't recall, and laughter he no longer heard. As he stared into the darkness, Alex knew one thing: he needed proof. The opportunity came one evening when Stephanie was out, leaving her work laptop open on the dining table. Alex had learned enough about her recent habits to notice when she was distracted, she hadn't shut the device down as she normally would. He felt a pulse of guilt at what he was about to do, but it was swallowed by a stronger force, the need to know. With one last glance toward the door, he opened her laptop. The wallpaper, a standard company background, didn't tell him much. Her inbox was the first thing he opened, scrolling through emails from her coworkers and managers, mundane updates on projects and deadlines. But as he went deeper into her inbox, something stood out. An email chain with a subject line reading simply, "Last night?" His hands shook as he clicked on the thread. At first, it seemed normal enough, until he read the message's contents. "Can't stop thinking about how perfect it was. Let's make it happen again soon. Maybe next week at the hotel? Same room?" The reply was from Stephanie's boss, Nate. "Last night was incredible. You were right. The risk just makes it that much better. Just tell me when and I'll make time." Alex's heart sank. He scrolled back further, catching fragments of their exchange, weeks of flirtation, rendezvous details hidden between lines of professional jargon, and suggestions of shared secrets, each email more personal, more loaded with implication. Alex felt his pulse quicken, his mind a riot of emotions. He navigated to another folder in her email labeled drafts and found several half-written notes to Nate. Some were long, others short, as if she'd struggled to find the words. One message lingered in his mind. "I've been meaning to talk to Alex. It feels like I'm living two lives, and I can't keep lying to him. You've become so important to me, and I don't want this to be a secret anymore." The realization cut deeper than he'd expected. Stephanie wasn't just flirting with her boss, she was planning to end things with him. Alex felt sick, his hands cold and numb as he continued searching. He had to understand the full extent of her betrayal. A new tab opened her chat application, which displayed their private conversations. He saw rows of heart emojis, phrases like, "Can't wait to be with you again," and even screenshots of dinner reservations, labeled with the dates and times. The locations were clear: a hotel downtown, a wine bar they had frequented once as a couple, even his favorite cafe. These weren't just casual meetings. They were planned with a precision that showed how well she understood the necessity of secrecy. She was leading a life entirely separate from him, one where he didn't belong. He scrolled further, catching another exchange between them. "Nate, can you sneak away tomorrow? I'll make up a meeting excuse." "Stephanie, only if you bring that tie again. You know how much I love it." The knot in his stomach tightened as he pieced together every cryptic text, every sly innuendo that felt like a knife twist. The person he thought he knew had become a stranger, someone who was sharing intimate moments with a man he barely knew. The Alex in their messages was reduced to a casual mention, as if he were an afterthought, a formality Stephanie no longer felt bound to. Driven by anger, he looked through the images on her computer, something he hadn't initially thought to check. There, nestled among folders labeled with project names, was a folder simply called Moments. Inside, his heart lurched as he saw pictures of her and Nate, laughing at a dimly lit restaurant, her head leaning into his shoulder. A selfie of them at a hotel balcony followed, the city lights spread out below them like a shared secret. One photo struck him harder than the rest. A picture of Stephanie wearing a dress he had bought her for their anniversary, standing close to Nate, his arm possessively around her waist. The casualness of it, the way her head rested against him, felt like a silent admission. These were moments she should have shared with him, gestures that belonged to them, yet she had given them to someone else. Then, as if fate weren't cruel enough, Alex found a saved video clip. The footage was short, a moment from a weekend where she had apparently told him she was working late to catch up. It showed Stephanie and Nate in what appeared to be a hotel room. They were laughing, wine glasses in hand, and as the camera lingered on her face, she turned to Nate with a look Alex had once believed was only for him. The screen blurred as Alex's vision clouded with tears. Stephanie's face in that moment, a mixture of love, happiness, and excitement, was one he had seen so many times, but he'd never imagined it would be directed at another man. The betrayal was etched into every line of her expression. The final straw was a message from just 2 nights before. Nate had written, "Can't wait for this weekend. Are we still on for the trip?" And Stephanie had replied with a single line that gutted Alex completely. "Of course. Can't imagine anywhere I'd rather be." Numb, he closed the laptop, his mind racing as he processed the sheer depth of her deception. Every kiss, every quiet conversation shared over morning coffee, every future he had imagined together felt like a cruel lie. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the double life she had led, the lengths she had gone to hide the truth, the man she had become in the shadows. When Stephanie returned that night, Alex was still awake, the laptop closed on the table. He watched her as she breezed in, humming softly to herself. She paused when she saw him, her smile faltering. "You're up late," she said, forcing a casual tone. "I was just looking through some things." He kept his voice steady, though he felt anything but. For a moment, they just stood there, the air heavy with unspoken words, her gaze flickering to the laptop on the table. Alex could see the realization dawn on her face, a flicker of panic in her eyes. He wanted to confront her, to shout, to demand answers. But in that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion, a realization that there was nothing left to say. After days of turmoil and restless nights, Alex knew he couldn't face the storm alone. He needed an ally, someone who could understand the devastation he felt, and more importantly, someone who would have as much at stake in seeking justice as he did. There was only one person who fit that description: Tessa, Nate's wife. Although they had met only a handful of times at company events, he remembered her as warm and kind, her loyalty to Nate evident in every affectionate glance she'd sent her husband's way. The thought of what she might go through broke Alex's heart, but he also knew she had a right to the truth. Gathering his courage, Alex sent Tessa a message asking if they could meet in person. The response came swiftly. Her tone was polite, even curious. He sensed she had no idea what was coming, and he felt a pang of guilt for shattering her world. But he reminded himself that it was Nate and Stephanie who had set these events in motion. They deserved whatever fallout lay ahead. At a discreet coffee shop downtown, Alex spotted Tessa sitting by a window, her expression warm as she waved him over. Her unsuspecting smile made what he was about to do all the more painful. He greeted her and sat across from her, taking a deep breath to steady his voice. "Tessa," he began, struggling to find the right words, "I wouldn't have reached out like this if it weren't important. It's about Nate and Stephanie." Confusion crossed her face. "Stephanie? You mean your wife?" He nodded, searching her eyes for any flicker of suspicion, any hint that she might already have an inkling of what he was about to reveal. But Tessa's gaze remained steady, a slight crease forming between her brows. "There's no easy way to say this," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I recently found out that they've been having an affair." The silence that followed was deafening. Tessa's face turned pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then shut it again, gripping the edge of the table. How do you know?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Alex pulled out his phone and showed her the messages he had saved. He watched as she read each one, her face shifting from shock to anger, then settling into a kind of steely resolve. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with a mix of hurt and determination. "So what now?" she asked, her voice low but fierce. "We take control," Alex replied. "We let them see that they can't manipulate us like this, that they don't get to decide everything without facing the consequences." Tessa nodded, and for a moment, a glimmer of solidarity sparked between them. They were partners now, united by shared betrayal and a thirst for justice. Together, they began to outline a plan that would leave both Nate and Stephanie exposed, vulnerable, and without the lives they had so recklessly built on lies. The first step involved gathering solid proof that went beyond texts and pictures. Tessa had access to Nate's calendar, and she quickly located a series of business trips that corresponded with the weekends Stephanie had mysteriously worked late. She forwarded these to Alex, her face tight with concentration as they pieced together a timeline. Each entry was damning, a breadcrumb trail leading straight to Nate and Stephanie's deception. Tessa suggested an idea that shocked Alex with its audacity. She knew that Nate frequently used his work credit card to cover expenses during client meetings, an allowance that their company offered with minimal oversight. They decided to comb through his statements for hotel charges, dinners, and trips that lined up with the dates in the calendar. Sure enough, receipts began to stack up, each one a testament to the depth of Nate and Stephanie's betrayals. But it wasn't enough. Alex and Tessa needed an undeniable moment of exposure, a way to confront their cheating spouses with irrefutable proof, and they knew exactly how to do it. Their plan was simple yet brutal. They would let Nate and Stephanie believe they'd gotten away with it, only to corner them in a setting where they felt secure and untouchable. Alex discovered that Nate had scheduled a team-building dinner at a high-end restaurant the following Friday night. It was the kind of event that company executives frequently attended, offering the perfect cover for a quiet, private dinner between him and Stephanie under the guise of work. Tessa and Alex decided that they would confront the couple right there, in the middle of the restaurant, turning their secret affair into a public scandal they couldn't walk away from. On the day of the dinner, Alex could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he and Tessa waited in the restaurant's lobby, hidden from view but close enough to observe every move. Soon, they spotted Nate and Stephanie entering together, laughing as they were led to a table set with flickering candles and fine china. It was an intimate scene, one that would have felt romantic if it hadn't been so deeply twisted. The time had come. Alex and Tessa rose from their seats, sharing one last glance that said everything. They strode toward the table, each step fueled by the betrayals that had brought them together. Stephanie spotted him first. Her face went pale, her smile slipping away as her eyes darted between him and Tessa. Nate's reaction was just as telling. His hand froze midair, his mouth opening in shock. Before either could speak, Alex pulled out his phone, setting it down on the table in front of them and pressing play on one of the more incriminating recordings of their messages. The sound of their flirtations and clandestine plans filled the air, each word more damning than the last. The restaurant fell silent as other diners turned to watch. Tessa leaned in close, her voice low but fierce. "You both thought you could betray us and get away with it. But this is just the beginning." Nate stammered, his face flushing with humiliation, but Tessa cut him off, her voice cold and unyielding. "You should know, Nate, I've sent copies of everything to your boss. And Alex here? He's sent a few to Stephanie's company. I think they'll be interested to know how their business expenses were actually being spent." Stephanie gasped, her eyes filling with panic. "Alex, please," she began, reaching out toward him, but he pulled back, letting the disgust show on his face. "Don't," he said, his voice hard. "You lost the right to ask anything of me the moment you decided I wasn't enough." As they turned to leave, Alex felt a strange sense of satisfaction settle over him. They had both walked into this night full of rage and betrayal, but they were walking out with something unexpected, a sense of control, a bond forged from the wreckage left by Nate and Stephanie's lies. Outside, Alex and Tessa shared a long, exhausted glance. They'd done what they'd come to do, exposed their spouses for the people they truly were. They walked away from the restaurant, knowing that while their lives would never be the same, they could finally close the chapter on Nate and Stephanie's betrayal. The fallout from Alex and Tessa's confrontation was swift and ruthless. Just days after the public exposure at the restaurant, whispers began circulating within Nate and Stephanie's company. Both had been high-profile employees, so the scandal caught the attention of colleagues quickly, fueling the corporate grapevine. It wasn't long before Tessa's forwarded emails and the compiled evidence found their way to HR and, ultimately, to the compliance department. By midweek, the company's internal audit department had launched an investigation into Nate's expense reports, scrutinizing every hotel charge, dinner reservation, and business trip he had claimed over the past year. On Thursday morning, Nate arrived at the office to find his access badge had been deactivated. He stood awkwardly at the entrance, his expression morphing from confusion to panic as security approached him. They quietly escorted him to a conference room where a representative from HR and the head of the compliance department were waiting, expressions stern and unyielding. The accusations were laid out plainly. There were concerns about misuse of company funds, including unauthorized expenses that appeared to be personal rather than business-related. Nate sat, visibly sweating as they showed him the evidence. A thick stack of printed receipts, hotel bookings, and detailed expense claims, all tracing back to his meetings with Stephanie. Each charge was damning, and the timeline matched up with his relationship with her exactly. He stammered, trying to explain, but his words fell flat under the weight of the documentation. Meanwhile, Stephanie's experience was equally humiliating. She had hoped the scandal would blow over or stay confined to whispers, but instead, the details spread like wildfire. She felt eyes on her wherever she went in the office, her once friendly colleagues now glaring or avoiding her. The emails that Tessa and Alex had shared with management had trickled down through unofficial channels, leaving Stephanie's coworkers to speculate about her relationship with Nate. Once respected as a hardworking professional, she now faced constant, judgmental glances. Her closest colleague, a friend named Mira, approached her in the break room one day, hesitant but resolute. "Stephanie, I heard about everything. I don't even know who you are anymore." Mira's voice was thick with disbelief and hurt, her eyes filled with disappointment. "We were friends. I trusted you, and I never would have thought you'd betray your husband like this. Or that you'd risk our team's reputation. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" Stephanie felt her face flush with shame, stammering excuses that sounded weak even to her own ears. Mira didn't wait to hear more. She shook her head and walked away. It was a dismissal as clear as any formal reprimand. From that moment on, Stephanie was alone at work, isolated in a way she had never experienced before. As the investigation continued, Nate's financial misconduct began unraveling even further. Every day seemed to bring new revelations of unauthorized expenses. Auditors found he'd expensed several high-end dinners, personal spa visits, and even a weekend trip to a resort, all under the guise of client entertainment or team-building events. Each detail only confirmed his unethical behavior, and it wasn't long before the company made the decision to suspend him indefinitely. Stephanie, by association, was pulled in for questioning, forced to explain her involvement in their so-called business meetings. On a Friday afternoon, she was summoned to HR. The director, with a disapproving frown, slid a stack of emails and receipts across the table toward her. "Stephanie, these are all expenses associated with your meetings with Nate," the director said coldly. "We have reason to believe you were complicit in misreporting personal expenses as business-related. Do you deny this?" Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation, but she could see the conclusion was already drawn. The once respectful tone from her superiors had vanished, replaced with suspicion and contempt. By the time she left that room, it was clear her career was all but over. Word of the investigation didn't stay confined to the company for long. As Nate's suspension became public knowledge, industry insiders began to talk. Nate had a reputation as a skilled executive, but the scandal quickly overshadowed his accomplishments. Within weeks, his name was synonymous with dishonesty and scandal in professional circles. Potential clients, mentors, and colleagues he'd once networked with kept their distance, wary of associating with someone under investigation for fraud. Offers for consulting roles or speaking engagements vanished, his phone silent where it once buzzed constantly with requests. Stephanie faced a similar professional exile. The once bright opportunities she had counted on, the partnerships and mentorship programs she had worked so hard to secure, all disappeared. Her colleagues no longer sought her input or invited her to meetings. Even junior employees who once looked up to her now avoided eye contact or whispered behind her back. Her LinkedIn messages filled with polite but dismissive responses from connections she'd previously thought were solid. The doors to every opportunity she'd built over years were now closing one by one. Outside of work, the fallout was even more severe. Stephanie's family, friends, and community caught wind of the affair, her reputation in tatters. Invitations to gatherings dried up, and friends stopped calling. She found herself increasingly isolated, the sting of shame weighing on her each day. Nate, meanwhile, found his social circle shrinking rapidly. Friends who had once admired his success and confidence now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with his tarnished reputation. As the financial investigation neared its conclusion, Alex and Tessa received word from the company's legal department. Nate and Stephanie had both been formally terminated. A letter arrived at their home addresses detailing the company's findings, the documented misuse of funds, and the finality of their dismissals. Both were banned from entering company premises and informed that they would face legal action should they attempt to interfere with the ongoing investigation. Tessa forwarded a copy of the letter to Alex. Together, they read it, feeling a grim satisfaction in the justice that had been served. They had both endured humiliation and heartbreak, but in that moment, they knew they had taken back some measure of control over their lives. Nate and Stephanie were left to confront the wreckage of their careers, their reputations destroyed and future prospects dim. Each was now known not for their achievements, but for the scandal they had created. In their professional communities, they had become cautionary tales, examples of how quickly trust could be shattered and reputations destroyed by selfish actions. The final blow came when both were blacklisted from several top firms in the industry. Word had spread quickly, and with their histories of ethical violations, no reputable company would risk hiring them. Nate and Stephanie were left with few options, facing a bleak future in the careers they had once built with pride. The paths they had paved for themselves had been obliterated, leaving them both to face the fallout of the choices they had made. Alex and Tessa, despite the pain, moved forward, each knowing they had been a part of dismantling the lives of those who had wronged them. The weeks following Stephanie's downfall felt surreal to Alex. Filing for divorce had been a decision he'd made without hesitation, though the weight of it was still sinking in. As he signed the papers, he felt an unexpected lightness, a sense of closure that marked the end of a painful chapter. Yet even as he watched Stephanie's name disappear from his life in legal terms, a quieter, more personal journey of rebuilding lay ahead. In the early days after filing, Alex found solace in reconnecting with his longtime friend, Mia. She'd been there for him from the start, a quiet presence of support who had listened to his frustrations without judgment. Mia was the kind of friend who didn't need to be asked to help. She simply showed up, offering quiet strength in moments he felt too tired to go on. One rainy evening, as they shared coffee in her small but cozy apartment, Alex felt a sudden urge to open up. He recounted the details of his heartbreak, the betrayal, and the loss of trust he'd felt not just in Stephanie, but in himself. To his surprise, Mia listened intently, her expression reflecting a deep empathy he hadn't felt from anyone else. It was during that conversation that he realized something had shifted between them, a warmth he hadn't noticed before, a subtle closeness beyond friendship. Around the same time, a spark of inspiration had taken hold. Alex had always dreamed of building a business of his own, something meaningful that would allow him to channel his creativity and talents into a project he could be proud of. He had an idea, a boutique consulting firm aimed at helping small businesses scale sustainably without compromising their core values. The concept energized him, giving him a renewed sense of purpose, and as he developed the foundation of his business, he often found himself discussing ideas with Mia, whose insight and enthusiasm for his vision was both grounding and inspiring. Mia's background in design was an unexpected but perfect match for Alex's venture, and before long, They were spending late nights brainstorming branding ideas, crafting logos, and refining his company's mission statement. Mia's presence was a calming force, balancing Alex's ambition with thoughtful insights, and soon, she became more than just a supportive friend. She became a partner in his dream. One evening, as they worked side by side, Alex realized he was more at peace than he had been in years. Here was someone who believed in him without ulterior motives, who saw the best in him when he was struggling to see it in himself. The new business took off gradually, starting with a handful of clients who'd been impressed by Alex's transparency and commitment. His focus on ethical practices struck a chord with local companies, many of whom had grown weary of impersonal, profit-driven consultants. The small successes began to add up, and with each new client came a sense of accomplishment that went beyond numbers or financial gains. He was building something meaningful from the ashes of his past life, creating a legacy defined by integrity and resilience. It was during this time that Alex felt his bond with Mia deepening. Their late-night conversations shifted from business plans to personal stories, laughter, and the kind of quiet moments that build trust. One night, after a particularly exhausting week, they decided to take a break from work and went for a walk along the waterfront. The moon cast a silvery glow over the water, and for the first time, Alex felt a genuine sense of calm, a reprieve from the chaos that had once consumed him. As they paused on a bench overlooking the bay, Mia turned to him with a gentle smile. "You know, I don't think I've seen you this happy in a long time," she said, her eyes warm and sincere. Alex felt his heart race, his chest tightening as he realized that he wasn't just rebuilding his life, he was beginning to envision a future with her in it. His divorce from Stephanie became final not long after. The process had been surprisingly swift, given Stephanie's own struggles and the fallout from her affair. She had attempted to reach out, perhaps in a bid for closure, but Alex had declined each request. He wasn't interested in rehashing the past or allowing her the satisfaction of a final conversation. His focus was entirely on moving forward, and he felt no need to revisit wounds that had only just begun to heal. With the divorce behind him, Alex poured his energy into his work and his relationship with Mia. Their connection blossomed into something richer, more intimate. She had been a constant source of support, her loyalty unwavering, and as they navigated the ups and downs of his business, he found himself falling in love with her. It was a love built on trust, on shared dreams and mutual respect, a foundation far stronger than the one he had once had with Stephanie. Their first official date was a modest affair, an outdoor picnic in a quiet park, but to Alex, it felt like a grand beginning. They laughed, reminisced about their early days as friends, and spoke openly about their hopes for the future. Unlike his past relationship, there was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just an honest, raw connection that felt as natural as breathing. As Alex's business grew, so did his relationship with Mia. She became his rock, his sounding board, and his greatest advocate. With her by his side, Alex felt he could accomplish anything, and together, they began exploring ways to expand the company, dreaming of what they could achieve together. They envisioned a future where the business wasn't just a job but a shared passion that allowed them both to leave a positive mark on the world. One evening, as they wrapped up a presentation for a new client, Mia surprised him with a small, thoughtful gift, a leather-bound journal embossed with his initials. "For all your future ideas," she said, smiling shyly. Alex opened it to find a note she had written on the first page. "Here's to every dream, every plan, and every adventure we'll create together." In that moment, Alex knew he'd not only found a business partner but a true partner in life. He reached for her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude for the journey they had taken to get here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the painful end of his marriage had all led him to this. An unbreakable bond built on trust and loyalty. As they toasted to the future, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. His life was finally his own again, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. He was no longer defined by Stephanie's choices or Nate's betrayal, but by the life he was building, a life marked by honesty, resilience, and love.